It's a fascinating aspect of human nature, the way we often don't value something until we stand on the brink of losing it. When someone rejects you, especially a man, it's easy to think they've made a calculated decision, fully aware of what they're walking away from. But the truth is far more nuanced. The reality is, many people act without fully understanding the weight of their choices. They make decisions in the heat of the moment, driven by short-term desires, fears, or even a lack of self-awareness. And then as time stretches out, the consequences of their actions start to take shape in ways they didn't anticipate. When someone rejects you, they might believe it's final, that they've shut the door on the connection and moved forward. Yet life has a way of circling back to unresolved truths. As they step away, they often carry an expectation, conscious or not, that you'll remain as you were. They imagine you staying in the same place, waiting perhaps, or quietly fading into the background. But when you don't, when they see you thriving, growing, becoming more radiant in their absence, that's when the fear of loss begins to stir. You see, loss isn't something we always feel immediately. It has a delayed reaction creeping in like the tide. At first, it's subtle, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps, about what you're up to. Then, as they realize they no longer have access to your light, your energy, and your presence, the absence becomes more acute. They start to see the outlines of what they let go of, the value of what they had taken for granted. And this realization is rarely comfortable. Imagine a man who walked away thinking he was making the right decision for himself. Maybe he thought he needed something else, something more exciting, or perhaps less demanding. In the moment it felt freeing. But as the days turn into weeks and months, that initial high begins to wear off. The silence where your voice used to be, the emptiness where your laughter once echoed it all, starts to weigh on him. The world around him begins to feel a little less vibrant, a little less full. And so the question arises in his mind, did I make a mistake? This is where the fear of loss truly takes hold. It's not just about missing you, it's about confronting the reality that you've moved on, that you've continued to shine without him. It's about realizing that life didn't pause for his absence, it carried on, and so did you. And that's a powerful moment, both for him and for you. Because in that space you hold the power, not him. But let's not dwell on his fear or his regrets. Let's turn the focus back to where it belongs on you. When someone walks away, their choices are not a reflection of your worth. Their inability to recognize your value in the moment doesn't diminish the brilliance of who you are. If anything, it's a testament to their short-sightedness, not your inadequacy. And this is where your power lies, because you don't need their validation, their return, or even their regret to affirm your worth. When someone fears losing you, it's because they're beginning to see what they've lost, not because you've changed who you are. That fear is a mirror reflecting their own lack of foresight, their inability to appreciate the gift of your presence. And while it's tempting to take satisfaction in their regret, remember your growth is not for them. It's for you. So when the fear of loss drives someone back into your orbit, ask yourself this: do I truly want them here? Not out of revenge or validation, but from a place of genuine self-awareness. Because your life is not a revolving door for those who only see your value in hindsight. It's a space for those who recognize your light, your strength, and your beauty in the present moment. In the end, the fear of losing you isn't the story. The story is how you choose to rise above it. It's how you embrace your own worth independent of anyone else's perception. And when you do, when you fully step into that space of self-empowerment, you'll find that it doesn't matter who stays or who goes. What matters is that you remain true to yourself, unwavering and radiant, no matter what. Rejection can often leave us searching for answers. We wonder what we did wrong, what we could have said or done differently to avoid the pain of being left behind. But here's the thing, rejection, more often than not, has less to do with you and more to do with the one doing the rejecting. It's a reflection of their inner world, their fears, and their inability to face something within themselves. When someone rejects you, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't value you. In many cases, it means they don't know how to handle the depth of what you bring into their life. For many people, being in the presence of someone who is authentic, emotionally present, and open is overwhelming. It shines a light on their own insecurities, the areas where they might feel unworthy or lacking. And instead of confronting those feelings, they run. It's easier for them to push away the discomfort than to sit with it and grow. This is why rejection can feel so personal when, in reality, it's often about their inability to meet you where you are. Now, when a man rejects you, he might tell himself a story to justify his actions. Maybe he convinces himself that the timing isn't right, that he needs to focus on other aspects of his life, or that you're asking for too much. These are just shields he puts up to protect himself from facing the deeper truth he isn't ready to handle the fullness of your energy. It's not that you're too much, it's that he feels too small in comparison. And that realization can be terrifying for someone who hasn't done the inner work to feel whole on their own. But here's where it gets interesting. Time has a way of peeling back those layers of self-deception. When he walks away, he's left with himself, his choices, his doubts, his fears. And in that space of solitude, the cracks begin to show. He starts to notice the absence of the light you brought into his life, the energy that made everything feel more vivid and alive. At first, he might try to fill that void with distractions. He might dive into work, hobbies, or even other relationships, convincing himself that he's moving on. But eventually, the truth catches up to him. That truth is, this rejecting you didn't erase the impact you had on his life. It didn't make him forget the way you challenged him to be better, the way you inspired him to see the world differently. Instead, it magnified what he's missing. And as that awareness grows, so does the weight of his regret. He starts to realize that in rejecting you, he wasn't rejecting your worth, he was rejecting the version of himself he saw reflected in your eyes. The version that wasn't ready to rise to the occasion. But here's the most important part, this realization. His regret is not your burden to carry. It's not your responsibility to soothe his fears or validate his choices. Your journey is not about waiting for someone to catch up to your growth or recognize your value after the fact. It's about continuing to evolve, to expand, to step into your own power, regardless of who chooses to walk beside you. So when someone who once rejected you comes back, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself not what they want, but what you want. Do you want to open that door again? Not out of a desire to prove anything, but because it aligns with your truth and your peace. Because at the end of the day, your worth is not determined by who stays or who goes. It's rooted in the way you show up for yourself, the way you honor your own journey. Rejection is not a statement about your value, it's a lesson in discernment. It's an opportunity to see who is truly capable of standing beside you, not because they need you to fill a void, but because they recognize the beauty and strength you bring to the table. And when you embrace this perspective, you'll find that rejection loses its sting. It becomes less about loss and more about alignment, letting go of what isn't meant for you to make space for what is. So when a man who rejected you begins to see what he lost, let that be his journey, not yours. You don't need his regret to validate your worth, and you certainly don't need his return to complete your story. You are already whole, already enough, exactly as you are. And that is a truth that no rejection can ever take away. We often underestimate the pull of familiarity. When someone walks away from us, especially in rejection, they might think they're stepping into a fresh start, leaving behind everything they believed wasn't working. But the truth is, when a connection runs deep, it's not something you can just set down and forget like a piece of old luggage. It lingers. It lives in the mind and heart, weaving itself into their thoughts, their habits, even their dreams. You see, relationships, especially meaningful ones, leave imprints. These imprints are not so easily erased because they go beyond the surface. They nestle into the fabric of someone's being, influencing how they see the world, how they experience other people, and how they feel about themselves. When a man rejects you, even if he doesn't fully understand why in the moment, he's walking away with all those imprints you've left behind. He may not realize it at first, but they will catch up with him. Let's consider what happens when someone moves on too quickly. They might think that jumping into another relationship or filling their time with distractions will silence the echoes of what they've left behind. But what really happens? That new relationship, that new chapter, will inevitably be measured against the depth and authenticity of what they walked away from. Even the smallest things, a shared laugh, the way you challenge them, the comfort of your presence, become glaringly absent. It's not about comparing individuals, it's about the experience, the essence of what you brought into their life. Here's what's fascinating: the mind doesn't just record events, it records how those events made us feel. And feelings are powerful things. They have a way of resurfacing, sometimes when we least expect them. A song, a scent, a quiet moment of reflection, these small triggers can flood someone's mind with memories of you. At first they might dismiss these as fleeting thoughts, but over time they start to notice a pattern. They begin to realize that no matter where they go or who they meet, there's a part of them that keeps returning to you. And that's because you represented something they can't easily replace, a genuine connection that forced them to see themselves in ways they hadn't before. Now, why do they come back? It's not always about regret in the conventional sense. It's not necessarily about undoing their choice to leave. Sometimes it's about seeking closure for the echoes they can't seem to silence. They may return not because they're certain they made a mistake, but because they're unsettled by the emptiness left in your absence. It's as though they're searching for a way to reconcile what they lost with the choices they made. But here's where it becomes important for you to understand your role in all this. Their journey back to you is not a measure of your worth. It's not a validation of who you are or the love you gave. It's simply a testament to the truth that meaningful connections leave marks that can't be erased by distance or time. Their return is about them trying to make sense of the impact you've had on their life. It's not a commentary on whether you should welcome them back or close the door for good. That choice is entirely yours based on what feels right for you. Remember, it's easy to romanticize the idea of someone realizing your value after they've left, but what truly matters is how you valued yourself in their absence. Have you used this time to grow, to understand your own worth, and to nurture your own happiness? Because when someone comes back, they're not just returning to the person they left, they're meeting the person you've become. And that version of you, the one who has learned to stand in your own light, is the one who gets to decide whether they still fit into your story. So if someone who rejected you decides to come back, take a moment to breathe. Don't rush to conclusions or decisions. Reflect on what you've learned about yourself, about them, and about what you truly want. You are not the same person they walked away from, and that's a beautiful thing. You've grown, you've healed, and you've discovered that your worth doesn't hinge on their choices or their recognition of what they lost. And in the end, remember this: the connections that are meant for you will never require you to diminish your light or question your value. They'll embrace you fully, without hesitation, without fear. And until that connection finds you, honor the journey you're on. Trust that every experience, even the painful ones, is guiding you toward a deeper understanding of yourself. And isn't that the most valuable connection of all? Sometimes when someone comes back after rejecting you, it can feel as though they've suddenly had a revelation about your worth. But often it's not so much about you as it is about the lessons they've been forced to learn in your absence. When someone rejects another person, they don't always fully grasp what they're walking away from. In their mind, they may believe they're making the right decision, pursuing their own version of happiness or freedom. But time has a way of unfolding truths that we're not ready to face in the moment. You see, rejection isn't just about leaving someone behind, it's also about leaving behind the version of yourself that existed in their presence. And for the one doing the rejecting, that can be quite disorienting. They step away believing they'll find clarity, but instead they often encounter confusion. They begin to realize that their decision wasn't as clean and definitive as they'd hoped. Because when you've shared a meaningful connection with someone, it's not something you can simply walk away from unscathed. It leaves its fingerprints on you, shaping how you move forward, whether you like it or not. What tends to happen in these moments of absence is that the person begins to experience a void. At first, they may chalk it up to the natural adjustment of life without you. They might convince themselves they're better off, that they're exploring new opportunities or relationships that align more closely with their desires. But that void has a way of growing. And what they often find is that the space you once filled can't be replaced so easily. Not because they can't meet new people or experience new things, but because the depth of connection you offered was uniquely tied to the essence of who you are. When someone rejects you, they don't just lose you, they lose the parts of themselves that you helped nurture. Maybe you brought out their creativity or encouraged their vulnerability. Maybe you challenged their perspective or offered them a sense of stability they'd never known before. Whatever it was, it's not something they can replicate with just anyone. And that's when the cracks start to show. They begin to miss the version of themselves that only came alive in your presence. They might not even realize it consciously, but it pulls at them nonetheless. As time passes, they may try to recreate what they had with you in other relationships or situations, only to find that it doesn't quite measure up. It's not that other people aren't valuable or that new experiences can't be fulfilling. It's simply that the connection they shared with you was singular, shaped by the unique chemistry and history you both created together. And so they find themselves looking back, wondering if they overlooked something profound in their rush to move forward. But here's an important truth: their return doesn't mean they've changed. It doesn't mean they're ready to offer you the love or respect you deserve. Often their return is born out of a desire to fill the void they feel, not out of a genuine commitment to repair what was broken. And this is where you must tread carefully. It's easy to be swept up in the narrative of their return, to believe it's a sign of destiny or redemption. But the reality is far more complex. You have to ask yourself, are they coming back because they've grown? Or are they coming back because they're afraid of what life looks like without you? Are they drawn to the person you are? Or are they chasing the comfort of the past? These questions are not easy to answer, but they're essential for your own peace of mind. When someone returns after rejecting you, it's not your responsibility to ease their discomfort or resolve their regrets. Your journey is about honoring the person you've become in their absence. It's about recognizing your own growth, your own resilience, and your own capacity to create joy and fulfillment, with or without them. And if they truly want to be part of your life again, they must show through their actions, not just their words, that they understand the depth of what they lost. They must meet you where you are now, not where they left you. They must demonstrate that their return is about building something new, not just revisiting the past. So when someone who once rejected you comes back, remember this: you are not their second chance. You are your own first priority. And whether or not you let them back into your life, let it be on your terms, guided by the wisdom and self-worth you've cultivated along the way. Because you deserve nothing less than a love that sees you, values you, and chooses you fully and without hesitation. When someone comes back into your life after rejecting you, it's natural to feel a surge of validation, perhaps even vindication. For a moment it can seem as though the pain you endured was worth it, as though their return is a clear sign that you were right all along about your value. But we need to tread carefully with this kind of thinking. Their return is not automatically a confirmation of your worth or their regret. In many cases, it says more about their journey than it does about yours. Let's pause for a moment and consider what rejection does not to you, but to the person who delivers it. Rejecting someone often comes with its own burdens. People don't always reject others because they lack affection or appreciation. Sometimes they reject because they are overwhelmed by their own insecurities or struggles. They walk away believing it's the best or easiest option, convinced that life will feel lighter without the entanglements of the connection they've decided to sever. But as time unfolds, they start to see that the act of rejecting someone doesn't always provide the clarity or freedom they were seeking. When they come back, it's important to understand the complexity of their motives. Sometimes their return is fueled by loneliness or regret. Other times it's driven by curiosity or the realization that they've been chasing fleeting desires while neglecting something more meaningful. And then there are moments when they return not out of love, but out of habit, seeking to reclaim the familiarity they once had with you. Their reasons might even be a tangled mix of all these things, leaving you to make sense of the confusion they bring with them. This is where your discernment comes into play. The fact that they've returned is not in itself a reason to open the door. You must ask yourself, what does their return mean for you? What is it that you truly want? It's tempting to think that the power lies in their hands, that the decision to reconcile or move forward depends on their intentions. But the truth is, the power has always been yours. Their return is merely a question posed to you, and it is your answer that will shape the path forward. Now here's the tricky part. Their return will often test your boundaries and challenge your sense of self-worth. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if you allow them back in, it's a sign of forgiveness or compassion. But forgiveness does not require re-entry. You can forgive someone entirely and still choose to keep them at a distance. In fact, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for both of you is to let the connection rest in the past, allowing each of you to grow in separate directions. But let's say you're considering their return. Let's say part of you believes there's still something worth salvaging, something worth exploring. If that's the case, then the responsibility lies with them to show that they've changed not just with words, but with actions. Words can be comforting, but they are not the currency of transformation. Genuine change is demonstrated through behavior, through the consistency of effort, and through a willingness to rebuild trust brick by brick. If they are unwilling or unable to do this, then their return is not about reconciliation, it's about convenience. You must also recognize the risk of revisiting the past. When someone who has rejected you comes back, there's often a temptation to romanticize what once was, to hold on to a version of the relationship that exists only in your memory. But the past is not the present, and the person standing before you now is not the same person who left you. Nor are you the same person they walked away from. Both of you have changed in ways both subtle and profound, and it's essential to meet each other in the reality of the present rather than the fantasy of the past. It's worth remembering that your life does not need their return to be complete. Whatever you've built for yourself in their absence, be it strength, peace, or joy, is not a placeholder for their presence. It's the foundation of your existence, independent of anyone else's validation or approval. You are not an option waiting to be chosen. You are a whole being, worthy of love and respect on your own terms. So, when someone who once rejected you comes back, take your time. Reflect not only on their motives, but on your own desires. Ask yourself if their presence adds to your life or merely complicates it. Trust yourself to know the difference between what feels right and what feels like settling. And above all, remember this: their return is not a measure of your worth. Your value was never diminished by their absence, and it will not be elevated by their return. If you choose to let them back into your life, do so from a place of strength, not scarcity. And if you choose to walk away, let it be with the knowledge that your journey is your own, unfolding beautifully in its own time. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful decision you can make is the one that honors who you've become. When someone comes back after rejecting you, there's often a subtle but significant moment of reflection that occurs not just for them, but for you as well. Their return isn't just a question they bring to you, it's an invitation for self-awareness, an opportunity to examine your own growth and clarity since they've been gone. You see, their actions might reveal their own confusion, their regrets or their hopes, but the focus shouldn't solely rest on their motivations. The real question is, what does this moment reveal about you? Rejection has a way of shaping us, doesn't it? It can feel like a wound at first, a blow to our sense of worth. But over time, if we allow it, rejection can become one of life's most transformative teachers. It forces us to look inward, to separate who we truly are from the external validation we may have sought. And in that process, we grow not because someone left us, but because we chose to stay with ourselves. When they return, however, it can be tempting to fall back into old patterns. Their presence can reignite feelings that were once put to rest, emotions that stir in the depths of our being, asking, did they finally realize what they had? Were we right all along? But here's the truth: the value of your growth isn't determined by their recognition of it. Whether they see it or not, whether they understand it or not, your journey is yours, unshaken by their ability or inability to comprehend it. Their return often comes with an unspoken offer, a chance to revisit what once was. Yet the past is a tricky thing. Memory has a way of softening the sharp edges, glossing over the details that once stung. You might remember the connection, the laughter, the moments of closeness. But do you remember the lessons, the clarity that came with the rejection, the strength you found when you had to navigate life without them? Their return should never overshadow the wisdom you gained in their absence. You see, when someone comes back, it's rarely about rewriting the story. It's about redefining it. It's about acknowledging that the chapter they left behind is complete, and if a new chapter is to begin, it must be written with care and honesty. This is where boundaries come into play, not as walls to shut them out, but as markers of the self-respect you've cultivated. Boundaries remind you of who you've become and what you're willing to accept in your life. And this leads us to the heart of the matter, the courage to be honest. Honest with them, yes, but most importantly, honest with yourself. What do you truly feel? What do you truly want? Are you entertaining their return out of love or out of a desire to prove something? Are you holding on to hope for what could be? Or are you tethered to an idealized version of what once was? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. When they come back, it's not your job to fix their mistakes or to validate their choices. It's not your responsibility to ensure their journey feels complete. Your responsibility is to yourself to honor the person you've become in their absence and to protect the peace you've worked so hard to create. If their return enriches your life, then perhaps there's a path forward. But if it brings confusion, pain, or a sense of obligation, then the most loving act you can offer both to yourself and to them is to let go. It's important to recognize that closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes closure is a gift you give yourself. It's the decision to release the past, not because it doesn't matter, but because it no longer defines you. Their return may be a part of their journey, but it doesn't have to disrupt yours. You can acknowledge their presence, even their remorse, without undoing the progress you've made. And here's the beauty of it all: whether you choose to let them back in or walk away, the decision lies with you. This is your moment of power, your opportunity to act from a place of self-awareness and strength. You don't have to justify your choice to anyone, not to them, not to the world. The only person you owe an explanation to is yourself. So when they come back, ask yourself, does this feel like alignment, or does it feel like compromise? Is their presence an addition to your life, or does it come at a cost to your peace? And then trust yourself to know the answer. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing isn't why they returned. It's how you choose to respond. And in that choice lies your freedom.